The mansion seemed calm, but the sharp eyes of the maid's daughter noticed that something dark was in the air. A silent kidnapping, a criminal plan, and a child in danger made her act without thinking. She infiltrated, sabotaged systems, and confused the intruders, alone, until the police arrived. If you were moved by this beautiful story of overcoming adversity and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Now, on with our story. The afternoon sun began to slant over the rooftops of the Kensington neighbourhood in London, casting golden rays that contrasted with the long shadows of the century-old plane trees lining Cornwall Gardens. It was an ordinary Thursday in March, one of those days when the stubborn heat of summer still insisted on lingering, making the asphalt exude a characteristic big city smell mixed with the aroma of coffee, wafting from the open windows of the historic mansions. Megan was only 10 years old, but her brown eyes carried a depth that didn't match her age. She was sitting on the back staircase of the Chadwick mansion, as she always did, while waiting for her mother to finish her work shift. Her worn-out sneakers dangled in the air as she watched, through the wrought-iron gate, the silent and organized movement of that house that seemed to have come straight out of a movie. Everything there breathed luxury, from the crystal chandeliers she saw twinkling through the windows to the imported cars parked in the garage with its travertine marble floor. Megan's mother, Claire, had been a cleaner in that residence for almost 8 years. She had started as a day worker, but the dedication and care with which she treated every room, every object, every detail, had won the trust of the Chadwick family. Now she worked from Monday to Friday, from 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, and Megan accompanied her whenever she didn't have school. During school holidays, like now, the girl practically lived there, invisible as a silent ghost who moved through the corners, the service corridors, the outdoor areas, always careful not to bother, not to be seen, not to exist beyond what was necessary. Megan knew every inch of that property. She knew where the switch that controlled the lighting for the winter garden was. She knew the secret path that led from the pantry to the utility area, without passing through the main kitchen, and she could identify by the sound of footsteps who was approaching. It was as if, in her forced invisibility, she had developed heightened senses, a perception beyond the ordinary. She observed everything, she registered everything, and she understood, even if unconsciously, the dynamics of that universe that was so distant from her own. The Chadwick family consisted of 3 people. Henry Alistair Chadwick, the patriarch, was a tech industry entrepreneur who had built an empire over the past 20 years. Tall, with broad shoulders, perfectly combed greying hair, and always dressed in tailored suits, he had an imposing presence. But Megan sensed something more. In the rare moments their eyes met, she saw a genuine kindness in those blue-grey eyes. Henry always greeted Claire by name, asked about Megan, and left generous tips at the end of the month. He was different from other employers her mother had had, those who didn't even acknowledge her existence. Henry's wife, Beatrice Alistair Chadwick, was the opposite. Blonde, elegant, always impeccably dressed in designer clothes and discreet but very expensive jewelry, she moved through the house as if floating. She never looked directly at Claire, communicating through notes left on the kitchen counter or short, direct messages. Megan feared her, not for any explicit cruelty, but for her absolute indifference. To Beatrice, people like her and her mother simply didn't exist. They were part of the decor, useful, but disposable. And then there was Peter Henry Alistair Chadwick Jr., but everyone just called him Peter. At 9 years old, just a year younger than Megan, the boy was the center of that luxurious universe. Light brown hair, green eyes inherited from his mother, cheeks still round with childhood plumpness. Peter studied at a very expensive private school in Richmond, had lessons in tennis, swimming, English and Mandarin. His routine was meticulously planned by his nanny, Mrs. Evans, a woman in her early 50s who had worked for the family since the boy was born. Megan and Peter had never spoken directly. She saw him from afar, always accompanied, always protected, always busy. But in recent months, she had begun to notice something. Peter watched her too. When he thought no one was looking, the boy would glance in her direction with genuine curiosity, as if he wanted to understand who this girl was, who appeared and disappeared from the corners of the house. Once, he even waved timidly, but Mrs. Evans pulled him away by the arm before Megan could wave back. That Thursday, however, there was something different in the air. Megan felt it as soon as she arrived in the morning. Mrs. Evans wasn't there. The nanny, who was as punctual as a Swiss watch, simply hadn't shown up. Beatrice was more on edge than usual, speaking on the phone in a low but irritated tone, locked in the second-floor office. Henry had left earlier, even before Claire arrived, which was unusual, and Peter had been taken to school by a driver Megan had never seen before, a tall man in dark sunglasses who smoked while waiting for the boy to get into the car. Throughout the morning, while her mother cleaned the upstairs bedrooms, Megan remained in the garden, pretending to read a book she had borrowed from the school library. But her eyes weren't following the words. They were alert, observing the unusual activity. Different cars parking on the street, men in suits talking outside. The gardener, Mr. Green, who always greeted everyone with a wide smile, was serious, almost apprehensive. Something was wrong. Megan didn't know exactly what, but her intuition was screaming. That unsettling feeling that settles in your chest when you sense danger, even without being able to name its source. It was 3:30 in the afternoon when everything began, to make sense in a way she could never have imagined. Megan was sitting on the stone bench near the side gate, the one that opened onto the adjacent street and was rarely used. From there, she could see part of the pavement and the beginning of Queen's Gate Terrace. That's when she saw the same car from the morning approach. The driver with the dark sunglasses was at the wheel, but this time Peter was in the back seat, in his school uniform, backpack beside him. The car didn't enter through the main garage. It stopped in front of the side gate. Megan hid behind the nearest tree, her heart accelerating for no apparent reason. She watched the driver get out, open the door for Peter with professional ease, but there was something about him that didn't fit. The way his eyes scanned the street, the tension in his shoulders, the hurried way he led the boy inside. Peter entered through the side door without protest. He looked tired, normal for a school day. But Megan noticed that he looked back before entering, as if expecting to see someone. Mrs. Evans, probably. The nanny always picked him up. She was always there. The door closed. The driver returned to the car but didn't leave. He stayed there waiting, smoking another cigarette, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel. Megan remained hidden, watching. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then another man came out of the house, not through the side door but from the back, through the service area exit. He was younger, dressed in casual clothes, a backpack on his shoulders. He waved to the driver, who responded with a brief nod. The man with the backpack walked quickly down the street and disappeared around the corner. It was then that Megan felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't right. None of it was right. She had to tell someone. She had to warn her mother. But before she could move, she heard footsteps approaching. Instinctively, she shrank further behind the tree. Beatrice came out the front door, wearing a white tracksuit, enormous sunglasses covering half her face. She got into her car, a gleaming white SUV, and sped off. She didn't even look to the sides. Megan waited until the sound of the engine completely faded. Then slowly, she came out of her hiding place and ran into the house, entering through the kitchen door. Claire was there, preparing the afternoon snack that Peter always had at 4 o'clock. Fresh orange juice, warm cheese scones, fruit cut into fun shapes. Megan's mother was dedicated even in the smallest details. "Mum," Megan called, her voice coming out quieter than she intended. Claire turned, her face tired but always loving. "What is it, sweetheart? Is everything all right?" Megan hesitated. How could she explain what she felt? How could she put into words that feeling that something was deeply wrong? She had no proof. She had nothing but an intuition. "The driver who brought Peter home," she began. "Do you know him?" Claire frowned. "Driver? What driver, Megan? Mrs. Evans always picks the boy up." "Not today. She didn't come. It was a man, with dark sunglasses, smoking." Her mother sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Megan, you know you shouldn't pay attention to these things. The family has its own affairs. Mrs. Evans must be sick. They hired a substitute driver. It's normal." But Claire's voice didn't sound as convinced as her words. Megan saw the shadow of doubt cross her mother's eyes, but she quickly pushed it away. It wasn't their business to question. It wasn't their place to have an opinion. That was the unwritten rule for those who worked in houses like this one. Absolute invisibility. Total silence. Megan nodded, but wasn't convinced. "Are you taking his snack to him?" she asked, pointing to the already prepared tray. "I am. You stay here and don't leave, understand? I don't want you wandering around the house." Claire picked up the tray and went down the hallway that led to the living room, where Peter usually watched television or played video games after school. Megan stood there, in the silent kitchen, the sound of the wall clock ticking away the seconds. Her heart was pounding. There was something she couldn't name, but it was screaming inside her chest. It was then that she heard the muffled cry. A sound that came from somewhere in the house, quick and sharp as a blade. Megan froze. Claire appeared at the doorway, the tray still in her hands, her face pale. "The boy's not there," she said, her voice trembling. "Peter's not in the living room. He's nowhere." Megan felt the world spin. She knew. Deep down she had known, since she saw that driver. Without a second thought, she ran into the living room, ignoring her mother's calls. She ran up the stairs, checked Peter's room. Empty. The bathroom. Empty. The playroom. Empty. She came back down, went through the library, the dining room, the office. Nothing. The boy had disappeared. Claire was calling Beatrice, her hands shaking so much she could barely hold the phone. Megan went out the back, the same way she had seen the man with the backpack leave. She went to the side gate. It was ajar. Someone had forgotten to lock it. Or had left it open on purpose. It was at that moment that Megan made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't just stand there waiting. She couldn't just watch. Something inside her, something deep and instinctive, compelled her to act. Peter was in danger. She was sure of it. And for some reason she couldn't explain, she felt it was her responsibility to do something. Megan looked back at the imposing mansion that had always intimidated her. She thought of her mother, who would surely be frantic. But she also thought of that green-eyed boy who had once waved to her, acknowledging her existence when everyone else pretended she wasn't there. She thought of Henry, who had always treated Claire with respect, who always left generous tips, who had once paid the hospital bills when she needed emergency surgery. She had to try. She had to at least find out what was happening. Without making a sound, Megan slipped out the side gate and followed the pavement. The driver's car was parked 3 houses down, in the shade of a tree. She approached in a crouch, hiding behind parked cars. The man was on the phone, his voice low, but clear enough for Megan, hidden behind a silver Corolla, to hear fragments. "Everything's set. The kid is secure. We'll wait until dark. Tonight, when the old man gets here, we'll make our move. The security guard has been bought off. It'll be easy." Megan felt her blood run cold. Secure. Move. Security guard bought off. The words echoed in her mind, forming a terrifying picture. This wasn't just a common kidnapping. It was something planned, something bigger, and Peter was at the center of it all. The man hung up the phone and started the car. Megan had only seconds to decide. Go back and tell her mother? But what if it was too late? What if while they waited for the police, something happened to Peter? She knew the stories. She knew how these things could end badly. Then she did something completely unthinkable. As the car began to move, Megan ran and hid on the back, clinging to the bumper. It was dangerous, she knew that, but something greater than fear was driving her, a courage she didn't even know she possessed. The car drove through the streets of Kensington, then along Cromwell Road, heading down towards the city centre. Megan held on with all her might, the wind whipping her face, the asphalt passing dangerously close. Her arms ached, her hands sweated, but she didn't let go. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, the car entered an area Megan didn't recognize. The streets were narrow, the houses simpler, many with bars on the windows and high walls. It was a neighborhood on the other side of the city, far from everything. Brixton, she recognized from a sign, or maybe it was near Clapham. She wasn't sure. The car stopped in front of a 2-story house, painted a faded yellow, with windows protected by rusty grills. The driver got out and looked around before going inside. Megan waited until she was sure he was inside, then let go and rolled behind a nearby dumpster. Her whole body was trembling. Her hands were scraped, but she was alive. And she was there. The house looked abandoned at first glance, but Megan noticed details. A curtain moving in one of the second-floor windows. A faint light on in the back. Smoke coming from a side chimney indicating someone was cooking. There were people inside. She approached slowly, crouching, using the cars parked on the street as a shield. She got close enough to hear voices coming from inside. There were 3 men, from what she could distinguish. They were arguing about something, their voices alternating between irritation and forced calm. Megan circled the house, looking for a way to see inside. There was a low window at the back, probably for a basement or storage room. She crawled over to it and, carefully, peeked through a slit in the torn curtain. Her heart almost stopped. Peter was there. Sitting in an old chair, his hands tied behind his back, a strip of duct tape covering his mouth. His green eyes were wide with fear, but he wasn't crying. He was quiet, too scared to react. Around him, 3 men were talking. The driver with the dark sunglasses, the man with the backpack she had seen leaving the back of the mansion, and a third she didn't recognize, older, with a scar on his face and tattoos on his arms. "The plan is simple," the man with the scar was saying, clearly the leader. "We use the kid as bait. The father gets home. Tonight, back from his trip. When he realizes his son is missing, he'll be desperate. Meanwhile, our contact inside disables the security system. We go in, head straight for the safe, grab the jewelry, the documents, the bank passwords, and disappear. Quick and easy." "And the kid?" asked the man with the backpack, lighting a cigarette. "After we get what we want, we'll leave him somewhere. They'll find him. We just need him to stay quiet until then." Megan felt nausea rising. They were planning to invade the mansion, steal everything, and use Peter as a hostage. It was an elaborate plan, thought out in every detail, and she was the only person who knew. She had to act. But how? She was a 10-year-old child against 3 adult, dangerous men. She had no phone. She knew no one in this neighborhood. She couldn't just scream for help, because that would put Peter in even greater danger. She took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. She needed to think like those men thought. She needed to anticipate their moves. And above all, she needed to be invisible. That's what she was good at not being seen, at not being noticed. Megan moved away from the window and began to explore the perimeter of the house. There was a side door that seemed to lead to the kitchen. It was locked, but the window next to it, one of those old-fashioned casement windows, was slightly ajar. It was small, but so was Megan. She could fit through. With careful movements, she pushed the window further up. The metal creaked slightly, and she froze, waiting to hear any reaction from inside. Nothing. The voices continued in the front room. Then, gathering all the courage she had, Megan pushed herself up and through the opening, landing silently on the other side, inside a small dirty kitchen with dishes piled in the sink and a smell of old food in the air. She was inside. Now she had to figure out how to get Peter out of there. Megan remained motionless for a few seconds, her heart beating so loudly she was sure the men in the next room could hear it. The kitchen had a dense smell of old grease mixed with cigarette smoke, and the light coming through the dirty window created distorted shadows on the peeling walls. Every sound seemed amplified. The creak of a floorboard, the distant hum of an old refrigerator, the male voices coming from the front room, interspersed with occasional laughter that made her stomach churn. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She couldn't panic. Peter depended on her. She was the only chance he had. Megan looked around, searching for something useful, anything that could help. On the coffee-stained table, there was an old mobile phone. She approached slowly, reaching out her hand. Her fingers were almost touching the device when she heard heavy footsteps approaching. Without thinking, Megan dove under the table, curling up between the old chairs and praying that no one would look down. One of the men entered the kitchen. It was the one with the backpack. She could see his worn-out boots inches from her face. He went straight to the refrigerator, grabbed a beer, opened it with a loud pop and drank half of it in one go. Then he let out a burp and went back to the living room. Megan waited until she was sure she was alone again. Then she came out of her hiding place and picked up the phone. It was unlocked, but there was no signal. Of course, they wouldn't be foolish enough to leave a working phone in a hideout. She put it back exactly where it was and continued her silent exploration. There was a door at the back of the kitchen that led to a narrow hallway. Megan approached and peeked. The hallway had 2 more doors, probably bedrooms or a bathroom, and at the end there was a staircase leading to the 2nd floor. The voices were coming from a room on the left near the hallway. That's where the men were, and presumably that's where Peter was still tied up. Megan knew she couldn't just storm into the room and grab the boy. She needed a distraction, something that would make the men leave, even if only for a few minutes. Enough time for her to untie Peter and find a way out. Her eyes scanned the kitchen again, this time looking for possibilities. The stove was old, a gas one, with knobs that made a clicking sound when turned. There were dirty pans piled up, a black kettle on a burner, empty alcohol bottles. Then she saw it. Under the sink, a box of matches and next to it a can of cooking oil. An idea began to form in her mind. It was risky, very risky, but it might be the only chance. Megan took the box of matches and the can of oil and silently climbed the back stairs. The 2nd floor was even more abandoned than the ground floor. There were only 2 rooms, both empty, with old mattresses on the floor and damp patches on the walls. One of the windows was ajar, overlooking the back of the house. Perfect. She entered the room closest to the stairs, where there was more trash accumulated. Old papers, cardboard boxes, a torn mattress leaning against the wall. Megan poured a little oil on the papers, enough for them to catch fire quickly, but not enough to create a truly dangerous situation. She didn't want to hurt anyone, just create a distraction. With trembling hands, she struck a match. The small flame danced before her eyes for a moment, and she hesitated. Was this really what she should do? But then she thought of Peter, tied to that chair, scared, alone. She thought about what those men were planning to do, and she let the match fall onto the oil-soaked papers. The fire spread quickly, consuming the paper with a low crackling sound. The smoke began to rise, thin at first, but getting denser with each second. Megan didn't wait to see the result. She ran back to the stairs, descended as quietly as she could, and hid inside a built-in cupboard in the hallway, leaving the door ajar just enough to see what was happening. It took less than a minute for the smell of smoke to reach the ground floor. She heard someone sniff, then an alarmed voice. "What's that smell?" "Smoke! There's a fire somewhere." Chairs scraping, hurried footsteps. The 3 men ran up the stairs, passing inches from the cupboard where Megan was hiding. She waited until she was sure they were on the floor above, then slipped out of her hiding place and ran into the living room. Peter was exactly where she had seen him through the window, tied to the chair, his wide eyes now fixed on her. He made a muffled sound through the duct tape, his eyes shining with a mixture of surprise and hope. Megan put her finger to her lips in a universal gesture of silence and went straight for the ropes binding the boy's wrists. They were tight, professional knots. She pulled, tried to undo them, but they were too tough for her small hands. From upstairs, she could hear the men shouting, the sound of water being thrown, heavy footsteps running back and forth. "I need something sharp," Megan whispered, more to herself than to Peter. Her eyes swept the room. There was a table with tools scattered on it, probably used for picking locks. Among them, a rusty pair of scissors. Megan grabbed the scissors and ran back to Peter. She began to cut the ropes, the old blade struggling against the tough fibers. The smoke was starting to come down the stairs now, getting thicker in the room. Peter coughed behind the duct tape, his eyes watering. "Almost there," Megan muttered, sawing with all her strength. One of the ropes gave way, then another. Peter's hands were free. He immediately ripped the duct tape from his mouth, wincing in pain but making no sound. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "How did you find me?" "I'll explain later," Megan said, already working. On the ropes binding his ankles to the chair. "We need to get out of here now." But the men were coming down the stairs. Megan heard the sound of their heavy boots, their angry voices. They had put out the fire, but the house was still full of smoke. There wouldn't be time to untie Peter's legs before they returned. "Come on," Megan said, dropping the scissors and pulling Peter by the hand. The boy stumbled, his legs still tied, but he managed to stand up. Together, half running, half hopping, they headed towards the kitchen. "There!" a voice shouted behind. "Them? The kid's escaping. Someone's with him." Megan felt pure terror run through her veins. She pulled Peter harder. They entered the kitchen and went straight for the back door. It was locked. Megan desperately searched for a key, but there was no time. The men were almost upon them. "The window," Peter said, pointing to the casement window through which Megan had entered. "Let's go." Megan helped Peter climb up, pushing him through the narrow opening as she heard the footsteps getting closer and closer. Peter managed to get through, landing on the other side with a dull thud. Megan was climbing up when she felt strong hands grab her ankle. "No!" she screamed, kicking with all her might. The man swore but didn't let go. Megan held onto the window ledge, pulling desperately. Peter appeared on the other side, grabbed her arms and pulled with her. For a moment, Megan was stuck, stretched between Peter's pulling force and the man's grip. Then, with one last joint effort, she broke free, her sneaker remaining in the kidnapper's hand, and fell out the other side of the window next to Peter. "Run!" Megan shouted, and they both bolted down the narrow street, Megan in one sock and Peter still dragging pieces of rope on his ankles. Behind them they heard the front door of the house burst open, the men coming out in pursuit. Megan knew the streets, not these specific ones, but she knew the type. Alleys, back streets, shortcuts that only children and those who grew up in tough places know. She pulled Peter to the left, then to the right, entering a passage so narrow they could barely fit. On the other side was a vacant lot full of tall grass. They threw themselves into the middle of the weeds, lying down completely, breathing heavily, trying not to make a sound. The men's footsteps ran past on the main street. They were shouting, swearing, searching, but they didn't look into the vacant lot. After a few minutes that felt like hours, the sounds faded into the distance. Megan and Peter lay there for a while longer, just breathing, their hearts pounding. Finally, Peter turned to her, his green eyes still wide with fear and adrenaline. "You're Claire's daughter," he said. It wasn't a question. "I always saw you at my house." Megan nodded, unable to speak, the tears finally welling up now that the immediate danger had passed. Peter had tears in his eyes too, but he was trying to stay strong. "They're going back to the house," Megan said, finally finding her voice. "They're going to break in. They said they have someone inside who's going to disable the security. Your dad is coming back from his trip today. They're going to do it tonight." Peter turned pale. "Dad? He doesn't know anything. He's going to walk in there and they'll be waiting." "We need to tell someone," Megan said. "We need to get to the police. Or call your dad, but we don't have a phone. We have nothing." Peter looked around, trying to get his bearings. "Where are we?" "I don't know exactly. I think Brixton. Or near it." "There's a police station on Victoria Street," Peter said. "It's not far from here. I think I can remember the way if we can get to the main road." Megan looked at the boy with new admiration. He was scared, but he was thinking. He was trying to solve the problem. She nodded. "Let's go then. But we have to be careful. They might still be looking for us." The two of them left the vacant lot and began to walk through the side streets, always alert, always hidden. Peter limped a little, his ankles bruised from the ropes. Megan was missing a sneaker, her bare foot treading on the warm asphalt. But they kept going. It was almost 5 in the afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the buildings. The streets were starting to fill with people returning from work. That was good, Megan thought. More people meant more places to hide. It took almost 40 minutes of cautious walking to reach Victoria Street. Megan had never felt so relieved to see a wide, busy avenue. There were buses, cars, people, civilization, safety. "The police station is there," Peter pointed, indicating a building a few blocks ahead. "Let's go." They started running along the pavement, dodging pedestrians, ignoring the curious glances that a barefoot girl and a boy in torn clothes naturally attracted. They were almost there when Megan saw something that made her stop abruptly. The car. The same car belonging to the driver with the dark sunglasses was parked on the other side of the avenue, and the man was outside talking on the phone, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was still looking, and somehow he had guessed where they would go. Megan pulled Peter into a convenience store, hiding behind a shelf of soft drinks. "Did he see us?" Peter asked, breathless. "I don't know, but he's right there. He's waiting for us to get to the station. So what do we do?" Megan thought quickly. They needed help, but they couldn't go straight to the police station. The man would see them. They needed another way to make contact. They needed a phone. She looked around the shop. There was a clerk at the counter, a young man in his 20s, headphones in his ears, distractedly scrolling on his mobile. On the wall behind him there was a landline phone. Megan approached the counter. The clerk looked up, eyeing her up and down with an expression somewhere between curiosity and irritation. "Can I help you?" "I need to make a call," Megan said, trying to sound confident. "It's an emergency." The clerk laughed. "An emergency? Kid, how old are you? 10? Where are your parents?" "Please," Megan begged, and this time she let the genuine emotion show in her voice. "A friend of mine was kidnapped. We're trying to escape. Please let me use the phone." The clerk's expression changed. He looked at Peter, who was behind Megan, his clothes dirty, his eyes red, the bruises on his wrists where the ropes had been. Then he looked at Megan again, saw her bare foot, the scratches on her arms, the genuine fear in her eyes. "Okay," he said, taking off his headphones. "Okay, come here. Use the phone. Do you want me to call the police?" "No," Megan said too quickly. "I mean, yes, but not here. The men are outside. They're looking for us. I just need to call someone, please." The clerk hesitated, but then he took the landline phone and placed it on the counter. "Call whoever you need to." Megan picked up the receiver with trembling hands. But then she realized a problem. She didn't know anyone's phone number. She didn't have Henry's number. She didn't have the police number memorized. She looked at Peter. "Do you know your dad's number?" Peter shook his head. "It's always saved on the nanny's phone. I never had to memorize it." Megan felt despair return. So close and yet so far. Then she remembered. Mrs. Evans, the nanny. Maybe she would know. Maybe she could help. But she didn't know Mrs. Evans' number either. "Wait," Peter said suddenly. "The nanny lives near my house, on Kensington Church Street. I can remember the address. We could go there." Megan looked through the shop window. The driver with the dark sunglasses was still on the other side of the avenue, but now he was looking in the other direction, talking animatedly on the phone. It was now or never. "Let's go," she said, handing the phone back to the surprised clerk. "Thank you, sorry." They left through the side door of the shop and headed in the opposite direction of the police station, staying close to the buildings, using the crowd as a shield. Megan looked back every few seconds, but the driver didn't seem to have seen them. Yet. The walk to Kensington Church Street took another 20 minutes. The sky was turning orange as the sun prepared to set. Soon it would be night, and it would be even more dangerous in the dark. They needed to resolve this soon. Mrs. Evans' building was an old 3-story block of flats with no doorman. Peter pressed the intercom for flat 23. Nothing. He pressed again. Still nothing. "She's not here," he said, his voice full of disappointment. "Maybe she's at the hospital, or looking for me." Megan felt the tears return. They were so close to getting help, but every attempt seemed to hit a new obstacle. She sat down on the steps at the entrance of the building, Peter beside her, both exhausted and unsure of what to do next. It was then that they heard the voice. "Peter, Peter Henry?" They looked up. An elderly woman with completely white hair, wearing a floral dress and carrying shopping bags, was standing on the pavement, looking at them with an expression of complete shock. Peter stood up. "Mrs. Gable," he said, recognizing Mrs. Evans's neighbor. "Is that you?" "My goodness, boy, what happened to you? Your family is frantic. Mrs. Evans called me a few hours ago saying you disappeared. Who is this girl? You're hurt." The words all came out at once, and Megan saw the chance they needed. "Mrs. Gable," she said, getting up and going to the woman. "Please, do you have a phone? You need to call the police. Peter was taken by bad men. They're planning to break into his house. The family is in danger." Mrs. Gable dropped her bags, her hand flying to her chest in a dramatic gesture. "Oh, my heavens! Of course, of course. Come to my flat. I'll call right away." She led them into the building, up the stairs to the second floor. The flat was small but cozy, smelling of home-cooked food and fresh flowers. Mrs. Gable picked up the landline phone with trembling hands and dialed 999. "Hello, police, I need to report. Kidnapping. A boy. He's here with me now, but the kidnappers are still at large and they're going to break into his family's home. It's urgent." She passed the phone to Peter, who explained the situation with a clarity that was impressive for someone who had spent the last few hours in captivity. He gave the mansion's address, described the men, and told them about the plan to break in at night. The operator on the other end of the line said she would send units immediately, both to the mansion's address and to pick up Peter and Megan. When he hung up, Peter sat down on the sofa, and for the first time since it all began, he broke down in tears. Megan sat next to him, and without thinking, she took his hand. He squeezed it back, and they stayed like that, two children who had faced the impossible together, waiting for help to arrive. The police car arrived 20 minutes later, but to Megan and Peter it felt like an eternity. Mrs. Gable had tried to calm them by offering orange juice and biscuits, but neither could eat. They sat on the floral sofa side by side, their hands still intertwined, staring at the door as if the kidnappers might appear at any moment. When there was finally a knock at the door, they both jumped. Mrs. Gable opened it, and two police officers entered, an older man with greying hair and a serious expression, and a young woman with kind eyes, who immediately knelt down to the children's level. "Are you two all right?" she asked, her voice soft but professional. "I'm Sergeant Patricia. No one is going to hurt you now, okay? You're safe." Megan nodded but couldn't speak. All the adrenaline that had kept her going for the past few hours was beginning to dissipate, leaving in its place a deep exhaustion that weighed on every muscle in her body. Peter, on the other hand, began to speak, describing everything that had happened with a desperate urgency. "They're going to break into the mansion tonight," he said, the words tumbling out. "They said they have someone inside who's going to disable the security. My dad's coming back from a trip. He doesn't know anything. You have to warn him. You have to protect my mum." "We've already sent a team to your residence," said the older officer, who introduced himself as Constable Davies. "Your family has been informed that you are safe, and we are surrounding the house where you were held. But we need you to come with us to the station to give your statements, all right? The more details you can give us, the better." Megan finally found her voice. "My mum," she said quietly. "Claire. She works at the house. She must be frantic. She doesn't know where I am." Sergeant Patricia placed a gentle hand on Megan's shoulder. "We'll let her know, too. You did something very brave today. Both of you. You saved lives." In the police car on the way to the station, Megan looked out the window, watching London pass by in a blur of lights that were beginning to switch on as night fell. She felt strange, as if she were floating outside her own body, watching everything from a distance. Peter was next to her in the back seat, silent now, his face pressed against the opposite window. The police station on Victoria Street was bustling, full of officers coming and going, phones ringing, voices overlapping. They took Megan and Peter to a separate, quieter room, with comfortable chairs and even some toys in a box in the corner. It was clearly a space prepared for children who needed to give statements. A detective inspector entered, a woman in her 40s with dark hair tied in a bun and sharp, intelligent eyes. She introduced herself as D.I. Rachel Campos and sat down opposite the children with a notepad and a pen. "I know you're tired," she began, her voice firm but not harsh. "But I need you to tell me everything that happened today. Every detail could be important for catching these men and stopping them from doing this to other people. Can you begin?" It was Peter who started, describing how a different man had picked him up from school, how he was taken to an unknown house, how he was tied up and heard the men planning the robbery at the mansion. Then Megan continued, telling them how she had noticed the strange behavior, how she had followed the car, how she had entered the house and tried to rescue Peter. The detective wrote quickly, asking occasional questions to clarify details. "Can you describe the men?" Do you remember any names they mentioned? Did they talk about who the accomplice inside the house was? Megan tried to remember every detail, but everything was starting to blur in her mind. The men's faces merged into an indistinct mass of anger and threat. She could only clearly remember the driver with the dark sunglasses, the man with the scar who seemed to be the leader, and the younger one with the backpack who smoked constantly. As for the accomplice, Megan knew nothing. The men hadn't mentioned names. They had only said that someone on the inside would disable the security. It could be anyone. One of the security guards, one of the staff, even someone close to the family. They were in the middle of their statements when the door opened abruptly, and a woman burst in like a hurricane. Beatrice Alistair Chadwick was transformed. Her always perfect blonde hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared with tears, her clothes wrinkled. She ran to Peter and grabbed him in a hug so tight that the boy almost lost his breath. "My son! My baby! Thank God you're safe," she sobbed, kissing her son's face repeatedly. "I thought I'd lost you. I thought I'd never see you. Again!" Megan watched the scene with a mixture of emotions. She had never seen Beatrice show so much emotion, so much love. The cold, distant woman who moved through the mansion like a queen in her castle was here, undone, human, vulnerable. It was almost shocking. Beatrice finally pulled back a little, holding Peter's face in her hands, examining every inch of him as if to make sure he was real. Then her eyes turned to Megan, and for the first time, she truly saw her. Not as the invisible daughter of the cleaner, but as a person, a child, who had saved her son. "You," Beatrice said, her voice still trembling. "You were the one who saved him. You were the one who found him." Megan nodded shyly, not knowing what to say. Beatrice let go of Peter and approached Megan, and to the girl's complete surprise, she hugged her too. It was a quick, almost clumsy hug, as if Beatrice didn't quite know how to hug, but it was there, genuine and full of gratitude. "Thank you," Beatrice whispered in Megan's ear. "Thank you for saving my son. I will never forget what you did, never." Before Megan could respond, another person entered the room. Claire was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. When she saw Megan, she ran and grabbed her in a desperate hug, sobbing loudly. "Megan, my daughter, where were you? What did you do? I was sick with worry, sick." "I'm sorry, Mom," Megan said, her own tears finally spilling. "I'm sorry I worried you, but I had to help. I had to." Claire pulled her back a little, looking her up and down, checking if she was hurt. "Are you okay? Are you injured?" "I'm fine, just tired." The two stood, there hugging, while Beatrice returned to Peter. Detective Inspector Campos watched the scene with a gentle but professional expression. After a few minutes, she intervened delicately. "I know this is a very emotional moment for everyone, but we need to finish the statements. The sooner we get all the information, the sooner we can act. Mrs. Chadwick, has your husband been informed?" Beatrice nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "He was on the plane back from Manchester. He landed at London City Airport half an hour ago. He should be arriving at the mansion now." D.I. Campos frowned. "At the mansion? But the suspects are planning to raid the residence tonight. Wouldn't it be safer for him to come straight here?" "He wanted to go home first. Said he needed to see with his own eyes that everything is okay, that he needs to check the security. I tried to convince him, but you don't know my husband. When he decides something, there's no changing his mind." Megan felt a tightness in her chest. The kidnappers had said they would break in when Henry arrived. If he was going there now, he could be walking straight into a trap. She looked at the detective, who seemed to be thinking the same thing. "We need to send backup to the residence immediately," Campos said, grabbing her radio. "And we need to find out who the inside accomplice is before it's too late." She left the room, speaking quickly into the radio, leaving Megan, Peter, Claire, and Beatrice there. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with tension and uncertainty. It was Peter who broke it. "Mum," he said, looking at Beatrice with a seriousness that didn't fit his 9 years. "Who was missing from the house today? Who didn't come to work?" Beatrice thought for a moment. "Well, Mrs. Evans, obviously. She called early this morning saying she was sick, and the afternoon shift security guard, Julian, he didn't show up either. His replacement, Marcus, covered both shifts." Megan and Peter exchanged a look. The security guard who didn't show up. It could be a coincidence, or it could be part of the plan. "And this Marcus?" Megan asked. "How long has he worked at the house?" Beatrice frowned. "Marcus, he's new. I think he was hired about 3 months ago. Why?" "Because if Julian is the accomplice and didn't show up on purpose, someone would need to cover his shift," Peter said, his voice gaining urgency. "Someone who could disable the security from the inside. What if Marcus is part of the plan too?" Beatrice turned even paler. "My God, Henry is going there now, and Marcus is on duty. If he's one of them—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. Everyone understood the gravity of the situation. Beatrice picked up her phone with trembling hands and dialed her husband's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. "He's not answering," she said, her voice rising. "Why isn't he answering?" "Maybe he's driving," Claire suggested, trying to be calming. "You know how Mr. Henry is. He doesn't answer the phone in traffic." But Beatrice wasn't convinced. She dialed again, and again. Always voicemail. With each attempt, her expression grew more distressed. D.I. Campos returned to the room, her expression grim. "I've sent 3 units to the residence. They should arrive in less than 10 minutes. And I've ordered a background check on the security guard Julian and the replacement Marcus. But there's something you need to know." "What?" Beatrice asked, her voice almost a whisper. "The team that went to check the house where the boy was held got there 15 minutes ago. The house was empty. The suspects fled. They took everything, left no traces. And worse, there were signs they left in a hurry, just a short time ago. It's possible they've already been warned that the boy escaped and that we're after them." "So they might have changed the plan," Megan said, the realization hitting her like a bucket of cold water. "If they know we escaped, they know the police are involved. They might have decided to act earlier. They could be heading to the mansion now." D.I. Campos grabbed her radio again. "All units, emergency code. Suspects may be en route to Cornwall Gardens now. I repeat, now. Approach with extreme caution. Possible hostage situation." Beatrice was in a panic now, dialing Henry's number repeatedly each time it went to voicemail, a sob escaping her lips. Peter went to her and held her hand. "It's going to be okay, Mum. Dad is smart. He'll be okay." But even Peter didn't seem to fully believe his own words. Megan saw the fear in the boy's green eyes, the same fear she felt in her own chest. Henry was walking straight into danger, and there was no way to warn him. D.I. Campos made a decision. "You're coming with me, all of you. We're going to the mansion. I want the family safe in one of our vehicles, but close enough in case we need you." They didn't question her. They followed the detective to an unmarked car, a black Civic with tinted windows. Beatrice got in the front, still trying to call her husband. Megan, Peter, and Claire got in the back. The detective drove, at high speed, the siren off but clearly ignoring some red lights, making maneuvers that would give any driving instructor a heart attack. The journey to Kensington took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Megan looked out the window, watching the city pass. The lights, the people on the pavement living their normal lives, oblivious to the drama unfolding. She thought about how everything had changed in a matter of hours. That morning, she was just the invisible daughter of the cleaner. Now she was in the middle of something much bigger, something dangerous and terrifying. When they turned onto Cornwall Gardens, they immediately saw that something was wrong. There were 3 police cars parked in front of the mansion, their lights flashing, creating patterns of blue and red on the facades of the historic houses. Officers in bulletproof vests were positioned strategically around the property, and the main door of the mansion was open. D.I. Campos parked at a safe distance and grabbed her radio. "Status on location," an officer's voice replied, tense. "Situation under control. We found 2 suspects inside the residence attempting to break into the safe, both apprehended without resistance. But the homeowner has not yet arrived. No one is injured." Beatrice let out the breath she had been holding, the tension leaving her shoulders. "So Henry hasn't arrived yet. He's safe." But the detective frowned. 2 suspects. The girl mentioned there were 3 main men. Where's the third? As if in answer to her question, a black BMW turned onto the street at high speed. It was Henry's. He braked sharply when he saw the police cars, got out of the car hastily, his suit creased from the trip, his face showing a mixture of confusion and alarm. "What's going on?" he shouted, running towards the house. "Is my family okay? Where is my son?" Before anyone could answer, another figure emerged from the shadows beside the mansion. It was the driver with the dark sunglasses, the leader of the kidnappers. He had a gun in his hand, and in 3 quick steps was behind Henry, the barrel pressed against his back. "Nobody move!" the man shouted, his voice desperate. "Nobody move or I'll shoot. I want a clear exit. A car and a clear exit or he dies." Time seemed to stand still. The officers aimed their weapons, but they couldn't shoot without hitting Henry. The entrepreneur was paralyzed, his hands raised, his eyes wide with fear. Megan didn't think, she just acted. Before Claire could stop her, she opened the car door and ran towards the scene. She heard shouts behind her, voices telling her to stop, but she didn't obey. She ran straight towards the man with the dark sunglasses and screamed with all the force of her lungs. "It's me you want. I'm the one who ruined your plan. Take me and leave him alone." The man turned his head in her direction, confused, and in that second of distraction, Henry acted. He spun quickly, unbalancing the kidnapper. The gun went off, but the shot went into the air. Officers rushed forward, tackling the man to the ground, disarming him and cuffing him in a matter of seconds. Henry staggered, almost falling, but he recovered. His eyes met Megan's, who was standing a few feet away, trembling, barely able to believe what she had just done. He walked over to her, knelt down to her level, and took her in his arms. "You saved my son," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "And now you've saved my life." "Who are you, brave girl?" "Megan," she whispered. "Megan Smith, Claire's daughter." Henry looked at Claire, who had run over to them, crying, and then back at Megan. His eyes were full of tears. "Megan Smith," he repeated. "I will remember that name forever. You are an angel, a true angel." The days that followed that transformative night seemed to belong to another reality, as if Megan had passed through a portal into a parallel dimension where the rules that had governed her life until then simply ceased to exist. The Chadwick mansion, which had always been a place where she needed to be invisible, suddenly became a space where her presence was not just noticed, but celebrated. The morning after the rescue, Megan woke up in her own bed, in the small 2-room flat she shared with her mother in Peckham. The sun streamed through the narrow window, creating a rectangle of golden light on the polished concrete floor. For a moment, Megan thought it had all been an intense, confusing dream, but then she saw her dirty clothes from the day before thrown over a chair, saw the scratches on her arms, felt the muscle ache from running, hiding, fighting. It was all real. Claire was in the tiny kitchen making coffee, but when she heard Megan stir, she dropped everything and ran to hug her again, as if needing to physically confirm that her daughter was there, safe and whole. "Good morning, my warrior," she said, her voice still thick with the emotion of recent events. "How did you sleep?" "I slept well," Megan lied. In truth, she had woken up several times during the night, startled by nightmares where men in dark sunglasses chased her down endless corridors. But she didn't want to worry her mother any more than she already was. The landline rang, a shrill sound that made them both jump. Claire answered, and Megan saw her mother's expression change from apprehension to surprise, and then to something close to disbelief. "Yes, sir. Yes, of course. We'll be there. Thank you so much, Mr. Chadwick. See you soon." She hung up and stood there, staring at the phone as if it were an alien object that had just materialized in her kitchen. "What is it, Mom?" Megan asked. "That was Mr. Henry. He wants us to come to the mansion today. He said he has a proposal to make, and that it's very important." Megan felt a pang of anxiety. A proposal? What kind of proposal? Part of her feared that Henry wanted to compensate them financially, and that this would make Claire feel uncomfortable. Her mother had a fierce pride when it came to accepting what she called charity. She had worked hard her whole life to raise Megan alone, never asking anyone for a favor. They arrived at the mansion around 10 in the morning. This time, they didn't enter through the back, through the service door as they always did. Henry was waiting for them at the main entrance, dressed casually in jeans and a polo shirt, a far cry from the formal suits he usually wore. He welcomed them with a warm smile and led them inside. The house looked different in the daylight after everything that had happened. Megan looked at each room with new eyes. The living room where Peter was supposed to be when he was taken. The hallway the kidnappers had planned to use to get to the safe. Everything now carried layers of meaning that hadn't existed before. Beatrice was in the living room sitting on one of the Italian leather sofas, with Peter beside her. When they saw Megan and Claire enter, they both stood up. Peter ran to Megan and hugged her without hesitation, as if they were old friends. "You came," he said, his green eyes shining. "I told Dad you would." Beatrice approached more slowly, but there was a softness in her face that Megan had never seen before. The aristocratic coldness had given way to something more human, more approachable. "Megan, Claire," she said, gesturing for them to sit. "Please, make yourselves at home. Literally." Henry waited until everyone was settled before he began to speak. He sat in an armchair opposite them, his hands clasped, his expression serious but kind. "First, I want you to know that the 3 men who kidnapped my son and planned to invade our home are in custody. The police also managed to identify and arrest the security guard Julian, who was the inside accomplice. They will be held criminally responsible for everything they did." Claire let out a sigh of relief. "Thank God. At least they won't do this to anyone else." "Exactly," Henry agreed. "And that was only possible because of your daughter's courage and intelligence. Megan, you are only 10 years old, but you did something that many adults wouldn't have the courage to do. You put your own life at risk to save my son, and there's no way to adequately thank you for that." Megan felt her face grow warm. She didn't know how to handle all this attention, all these eyes fixed on her, waiting for some response. "I just did what was right," she said quietly. "I couldn't let something bad happen to Peter." Henry smiled, but there were tears in the corners of his eyes. "It's precisely that kind of goodness, that sense of justice, that makes you so special, Megan. And that's why Beatrice and I talked at length last night, and we came to a decision." He paused, looking at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. "Claire, you've worked for our family for 8 years. You've always been dedicated, honest, careful. We trust you completely. And your daughter has shown not only courage, but also a character that is rare to find in anyone, regardless of age. Therefore, we want to make a proposal that we hope will change both of your lives for the better." Claire sat up straight, clearly nervous. "Mr. Henry, I don't want charity. If you're thinking of giving us money—" "It's not charity, Claire," Beatrice interrupted, her voice surprisingly firm but gentle. "It's gratitude. It's recognition. And it's also an opportunity we'd like to offer, but you are completely free to refuse if you don't think it's the best thing for you." Henry continued. "The proposal is this. First, we want to ensure that Megan has access to the best possible education. We would like to pay for her to study at St. Francis College, the same school where Peter studies. It's one of the best private schools in London, and we believe Megan deserves that opportunity." Megan felt her jaw drop. The school where Peter studied? She had passed by that school a few times, seen the impeccable uniforms, the imported cars of the parents picking up their children. It was a world completely outside her reality. "Second," Henry went on, "we would like to offer you both a place to live. Not here in the main mansion, but we have a guest house at the back of the property that has been empty for years. It's a 2-bedroom space. Full kitchen, living room, all independent. You would have privacy and comfort. Claire, you could continue to work here if you wished, but with a significantly better salary and much better conditions. Or, if you prefer, you can look for another job and simply use the house as your residence, with no employment ties. The choice is yours." Claire was pale, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Henry, this is too much. It's too generous. I don't know what to say." "Say yes, Mom," Beatrice suggested with a half-smile. "That's what we'd like to hear. But we understand if you need time to think, to talk it over. There's no rush. The offer stands regardless of how long you take to decide. Megan looked at her mother, saw the tears beginning to form in the corners of her eyes. Claire was a strong woman who rarely cried, but at that moment she was visibly moved. Peter approached Megan and took her hand. "We can study together," he said enthusiastically. "You can help me with maths. I'm terrible at maths, but I'm good at history. I can help you too." Megan couldn't hold back a smile. The idea of studying at a private school, of having real classes with specialized teachers, of having friends, of having a normal life, was both exciting and terrifying. She didn't know if she would be able to do it, if she would fit in, if the other children would accept her. As if reading her thoughts, Beatrice spoke. "Megan, I know it might seem scary at first. A new environment, new people, but you are intelligent, brave and kind. I am absolutely certain you will adapt wonderfully. And Peter is already excited to have a friend at school." Henry stood up and approached Claire. "Claire, you raised an extraordinary daughter, alone with limited resources. That speaks volumes about the kind of person you are. Let us help, not out of charity, but because you deserve it. Because Megan saved the most precious thing in the world to me, my son." It was that last sentence that broke Claire's resistance. She began to cry, silently at first, then in sobs that came from a deep place, carrying years of struggle, of sacrifice, of hard work. Megan stood up and hugged her mother, and the two of them stayed like that, intertwined, crying together, while Henry, Beatrice, and Peter waited patiently. Finally, Claire pulled away, wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and looked at Henry with firm determination. "I accept," she said, her voice still trembling but clear. "I accept everything, but on one condition." "Which is?" Henry asked. "I continue to work here, not because of the house or the money, but because I like what I do. I like taking care of this house, being part of this family, even from a distance. And I want Megan to understand that the good things in life come through honest work and dignity. I don't want her to think we're being supported. I want her to see that we are earning our place." Henry extended his hand. "You have my word. And Claire, I'd like you to also consider taking on a role as supervisor of the cleaning team. We need someone trustworthy to coordinate the other staff, with a salary appropriate for the new position, of course." Claire shook his hand, an agreement sealed not just with words, but with mutual respect and understanding. The following weeks were a whirlwind of change. Megan and Claire moved into the guest house, a charming and cozy space, with large windows that let in plenty of light, wooden floors that creaked softly when walked on, and a small garden at the back where jasmine grew, perfuming the air on warm nights. For Megan, waking up in a room that was all her own, with a comfortable bed, a wardrobe for her clothes and a desk where she could do her homework, was like living in a fairy tale. But unlike fairy tales, this was real. She could touch the walls, feel the softness of the rug under her feet, look out the window, and see the main garden of the mansion, now not as an outside observer, but as someone who was part of that place. Enrollment at St. Francis College was processed quickly, thanks to Henry's influence. Megan received new uniforms, a full set of school supplies, a backpack, trainers for PE, everything she would need. The day before her first day of school, she tried on the uniform for the first time, stood in front of the mirror in her room, and almost didn't recognize the girl looking back at her. The crisp white shirt, the navy blue pleated skirt, the blazer with the school crest, embroidered on the pocket. She looked like someone else. "You look beautiful," Claire said, appearing at the door with teary eyes. "My daughter is going to one of the best schools in London. If your grandmother were alive, she would be so proud." Megan hugged her mother. "I'm scared, Mom. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't keep up with the classes? What if no one wants to be my friend?" Claire held her daughter's face in her hands. "Megan Smith, you faced down 3 dangerous men to save a boy you barely knew. You crossed the city clinging to a car, broke into a kidnapper's hideout, created distractions and saved lives. If you could do all that, you can handle a bunch of 10-year-olds at a school, no matter how posh it is. You are stronger than you think." And she was right. The first day at St. Francis College was scary, yes, Megan walked through those enormous gates beside Peter, who made a point of accompanying her everywhere, introducing her to his classmates, showing her where each room was, explaining the unwritten rules of the school. The other children looked at her with curiosity, some with genuine interest, others with a reservation she recognized as class-based suspicion. But Megan had a story, and stories have power. It didn't take long for everyone to know that she was the girl who had saved Peter from the kidnappers. The news had been in the papers, after all. He was the son of an important businessman. And suddenly, Megan wasn't just the new student. She was the brave girl, the hero. During the first day's break time, a group of girls approached her in the courtyard. Their leader, a blonde girl with light eyes named Laura, looked Megan up and down before speaking. "Is it true you saved Peter?" she asked, her tone challenging. "It's true," Megan replied, meeting Laura's eyes without looking away. "How?" And Megan told them, not boasting, not exaggerating, just stating the facts simply and directly. When she finished, Laura and the other girls were wide-eyed. "That's incredible," Laura said, and suddenly the challenge in her voice had given way to genuine admiration. "You're like a real-life superhero." "I'm not a superhero," Megan said. "I just did what needed to be done." But this modesty, far from diminishing their admiration, only increased it. Megan found that making friends was easier than she had imagined. Not because she was special or different, but because she was genuine. She didn't try to impress anyone, didn't pretend to be something she wasn't. And people responded to that authenticity. The classes were challenging. The curriculum at St. Francis College was rigorous, and there were gaps in Megan's knowledge that needed to be filled. But she worked hard, studied late into the night, asked for help when she didn't understand something. The teachers, impressed by her dedication, offered extra support. And Peter, true to his promise, helped her with history while Megan helped him with maths. But it wasn't just studies that filled Megan's life now. For the first time, she had time to be a child. She had friends to play with after school. She participated in extracurricular activities, choosing drama, a passion she discovered after taking part in a school performance. She had free weekends to explore, read, draw, dream. And her relationship with the Chadwick family evolved naturally. She was no longer the invisible daughter of the cleaner who moved through the shadows. She was Megan, Peter's friend, Henry and Beatrice's ward. They sometimes had dinner together, the two families at the large dining table in the mansion, talking about their day, laughing at inside jokes, planning weekend outings. Beatrice, whom Megan had always feared for her coldness, revealed herself to be a complex person who was learning day by day to be warmer, more present. The shock of almost losing her son had transformed her. She spent more time at home now, less time at social lunches and empty engagements. She learned to cook, something she had never done before, and surprised everyone with a natural talent for baking. Her carrot cake with cream cheese frosting became legendary among the children. Henry in turn became a father figure, not just to Peter, but in a way to Megan as well. He didn't try to replace the father she had never known, but he was there, present, offering advice, celebrating her achievements, showing up at school performances, as proud as if she were his own daughter. 3 months after the move, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Megan was in the mansion's garden, reading an adventure book she had borrowed from the school library when Peter approached, carrying a football. "Want to play?" he asked. "I don't know how to play football," Megan admitted. "I'll teach you, it's easy." And there in that garden she had watched for so long from the outside, Megan learned to kick a ball, to do keepy-uppies, to laugh when she missed, and to celebrate when she scored. It was a simple moment, ordinary even, but for her it represented something bigger. It represented belonging. It represented that this place, this life, were no longer a distant dream, but her reality. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the two of them sat on the lawn, breathless and happy. Peter looked at Megan with a serious expression that contrasted with the light-hearted moment they had shared. "You know you saved my life, right?" he said. "You've already thanked me like 1,000 times," Megan replied, rolling her eyes affectionately. It's not just that, you made my life better too. Before I didn't have any real friends. I had schoolmates, but no one who really cared about me. Now I have you, and that means a lot. Megan felt her heart swell in a good way. You made my life better too, she said. Before, I was invisible. Now I have a family, a life, a future. We'll always be friends, Peter said, holding out his little finger. Promise? Megan linked her little finger with his. Promise. And at that moment, under the colourful evening sky, two children whom fate had brought together in an unexpected way sealed a friendship that they both felt would last forever. The months turned into a year, and that year unfolded into another. Megan grew, not just physically, but in every possible sense. At 12, she was no longer the shy, invisible girl who watched life from a distance. She was confident, articulate, a brilliant student who consistently ranked at the top of her class. Her passion for drama had blossomed, and she had won the lead role in the school's end-of-year play, a modern adaptation of Romeo and Juliet that would bring parents to tears. But growth did not come without challenges, and it was on a rainy Tuesday in May that the first major test of Megan's new life presented itself unexpectedly. It was lunchtime at St. Francis College, and Megan was sitting in the canteen with her group of friends, including Laura, who had become her best friend after a rocky start. They were chatting excitedly about the play, discussing costumes and stage directions, when a group of older boys from Year 8 walked past them. One of them, a tall, gangly boy named Rory, known for being arrogant and coming from an extremely wealthy family, stopped beside their table. He looked at Megan with an ironic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, the famous Megan," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "The poor girl who became Cinderella. How's it feel living off charity in the Chadwick mansion?" The group of girls fell, silent, the mood at the table instantly shifting from light to tense. Megan felt her blood boil, but she kept her voice calm. "I don't live off charity. My mother works honestly, and we live in the guest house." Rory laughed, an unpleasant sound. "Sure, sure. And studying here for free? Is that honest work too? Or is it just charity in disguise?" Before Megan could answer, Peter appeared out of nowhere, placing himself between her and Rory. Despite being 2 years younger and considerably smaller, his voice had an authority that surprised everyone. "You don't know what you're talking about. Rory, Megan saved my life. She has more courage in her little finger than you'll have in your entire life, and she doesn't study here for free. My dad pays because she deserves it, because she's one of the smartest and kindest people I've ever met. So I suggest you shut up and get out of here before I tell the headmaster about the chemistry exams you bought last term." Rory's face turned red, a mixture of anger and shame. He opened his mouth to reply, thought better of it, and simply stomped away, his friends following him in silence. Megan looked at Peter, her heart tight with gratitude and something more, an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But I can defend myself." Peter smiled. "I know you can, but friends defend each other, don't they? That's what we do." And he went back to his own table where his classmates were waiting. Megan watched him go, feeling a mix of complex emotions. Peter was no longer the scared 9-year-old boy she had saved. He was growing up too, becoming someone strong, loyal, protective. And their friendship, which had begun in such dramatic circumstances, had transformed into something deep and unshakable. But the incident with Rory left a mark. That evening, Megan was quiet during dinner. Claire noticed immediately that something was wrong. "What happened, sweetheart?" she asked after they had finished eating and were washing the dishes together in the guest house kitchen. Megan hesitated, but then she told her everything. Her mother listened in silence, just nodding occasionally, her face showing an understanding that came from years of her own experience with class discrimination. When Megan finished, Claire dried her hands on a tea towel and sat at the table, gesturing for her daughter to sit beside her. "Megan, you need to understand something. There will always be people like that boy. People who look at you and don't see who you really are, but only where you came from. And there's nothing you can do to change that, but what you can do is choose how you respond." "What do you mean?" Megan asked. "You can let their words hurt you, make you feel small, make you question your worth. Or you can know deep inside you that your worth doesn't come from where you live or how much money you have or who pays for your school. Your worth comes from who you are, from your actions, your character, your kindness and courage, and no one can take that away from you. Megan felt tears burning in her eyes. Sometimes it's hard, Mom. Sometimes I feel like an imposter, like I don't really belong in this world. Claire took her daughter's hands in hers. You don't belong to this world, Megan, and that's not a bad thing. You belong to a better world, a world where people are judged by their actions, not their bank accounts. But you're learning to navigate this other world too, and that will make you stronger, more understanding, more capable of making a difference. Never forget where you came from, but also never let it limit where you can go. Those words became a mantra for Megan in the following weeks. She repeated them to herself when she felt out of place, when she heard subtle comments about her background, when she noticed looks of pity or contempt. And it worked. She discovered an inner strength she didn't know she possessed, an ability to stand firm in her own truth even when the world around her tried to redefine it. The seasons changed and December arrived. The play was scheduled for the last week before the summer holidays, and Megan was nervous but excited. She rehearsed her lines every day, sometimes alone in her room, sometimes with Peter playing the role of Romeo, during informal rehearsals in the mansion's garden. One afternoon, 3 days before the premiere, Megan was on the stage of the school auditorium for a dress rehearsal when she sensed a familiar presence in the front rows. She looked and saw Henry sitting there, wearing a grey suit, having likely left an important meeting to watch his adopted daughter's rehearsal, because that's what she was now officially. 6 months ago, Henry and Beatrice had begun the adoption process. Claire, in one of the most difficult decisions of her life, had agreed, not because she wanted to get rid of her daughter, but because she wanted to give Megan every possible opportunity. And being legally part of the Chadwick family would open doors that would otherwise remain closed. The process had been emotional for everyone involved. Megan had gained not only adoptive parents, but had also kept her biological mother. Now she had Claire, whom she called Mom, and Beatrice and Henry, whom she referred to as Aunt Bee and Uncle Henry, although legally they were her adoptive parents. It was an unusual setup, but it worked for them. And the love was real, regardless of the titles. When the rehearsal ended, Megan came down from the stage and went to Henry, who greeted her with a tight hug. "You were wonderful," he said, pride evident in his voice. "You're going to make everyone cry on opening night. I bet even Peter will cry, and you know how he tries to act tough." Megan laughed. "He'll deny it afterwards. He definitely will, but I'll have photographic proof." They walked together to the car park, where Henry's driver, a man in his 50s named Sylvester, who had served them for decades, was waiting patiently. During the drive back to Kensington, Henry was quiet, thoughtful. Megan noticed he was looking out the window with a distant expression. "Uncle Henry, is everything okay?" she asked. He turned to her and smiled, but there was a melancholy in the smile. "I was just thinking about how things have changed in the last 2 years. How you've changed, how we've changed. That terrible night that almost destroyed us ended up being the catalyst for something beautiful. You're not just my adopted daughter, Megan. You are an essential part of this family, and I can't imagine our life without you." Megan felt a lump in her throat. "I can't imagine my life without you all either. Sometimes it still feels like a dream. I'm afraid I'll wake up and find none of it is real." Henry held her hand. "It's very real, and you deserve every moment of it, not because of what you did for us, although we are eternally grateful, but because you are extraordinary in your own right. Your kindness, your intelligence, your determination, all of that is yours. You built that." They arrived home to find Beatrice and Peter in the garden, preparing a small surprise celebration. There were balloons hanging from the trees, a table with cakes and sweets, and a handmade banner by Peter that read in colorful, slightly crooked letters, "Congratulations, Megan, future Broadway star." Megan laughed until her stomach hurt, especially when Peter admitted he wasn't sure if Broadway was in the UK or not, but that it sounded impressive. They spent the afternoon there, eating cake, talking, laughing, enjoying the kind of simple yet deeply meaningful moment that turns a house into a home and people into a family. Claire arrived later, after finishing her supervisory duties for the day, and joined the celebration. Megan watched her biological mother and adoptive parents interact with genuine ease, without tension or resentment. It was an unusual dynamic, certainly, but it worked because everyone involved put Megan's well-being above egos or jealousy. The night of the play's premiere finally arrived. Megan was backstage, her heart pounding so hard she was sure the entire audience could hear it. She peeked through a slit in the curtain and saw the auditorium was completely packed. In the third row, right in the center, were Henry, Beatrice, Peter and Claire, all dressed elegantly, waiting anxiously. Megan took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and remembered everything she had been through to get there. The invisible girl who watched life from afar. The terrible day of the kidnapping. The courage she had found when she needed it most. The changes, the challenges, the growth. And she realized she wasn't nervous because she was afraid of failing, but because she was excited to finally show everyone who she really was. The lights dimmed, the curtain opened, and Megan walked onto the stage. She lost herself in the character, in the emotions, in the story. Every line she had so carefully memorized came out naturally, as if it had always been there, waiting to be spoken. She made the audience laugh in the comedic moments, held their breath in the tense ones, and when the final scene arrived, the scene of Juliet's death, she made them cry. Megan delivered her character's final words with an intensity that came from a deep and true place. When she finally closed her eyes and lay still on the stage, the auditorium was in complete silence for a moment that seemed to stretch on forever. Then it erupted in applause. Megan stood up for the final bow, and through the tears blurring her vision, she saw her family on their feet applauding fervently. Peter had tears streaming down his face, just as Henry had predicted. Beatrice was dabbing her eyes delicately with a handkerchief. Henry was clapping with his hands above his head, a huge smile on his face, and Claire was crying openly, unashamedly, the tears of a mother watching her daughter shine. After the play backstage, Megan was flooded with hugs and congratulations. Her castmates lifted her onto their shoulders. The teachers made a point of telling her she had a brilliant future ahead, and the parents of other students greeted her warmly. But it was when her family arrived backstage that Megan felt the true magnitude of the moment. Henry hugged her first, without words, just holding her tight, as if to protect her from anything the world might throw her way. Beatrice kissed her on the forehead, whispering that she was so proud her heart could barely contain it. Peter, trying to hide that he had been crying, simply said, "You smashed it," which coming from him was the highest possible praise. And then Claire approached. Mother and daughter looked at each other for a long moment, and nothing needed to be said. All the love, all the sacrifice, all the struggle Claire had faced to raise Megan alone, it was all there in that look. And there was also the recognition that she had done the right thing, that allowing Megan to become part of the Chadwick family hadn't diminished the love between them, but had amplified it, creating a network of support and affection that only made Megan stronger. "My star," Claire whispered, hugging her daughter, "I always knew you were destined to shine." They left the auditorium as a complete family, in all their complexity and unconventionality. And as they walked through the car park, lit by the full moon of a London summer night, Megan looked back one last time, seeing the school building where she had just experienced one of the most important moments of her life. She was 12 years old. She had a family that loved her. She had true friends. She had a future full of possibilities. And it had all started on that terrible day, 2 years ago, when an invisible girl decided she needed to do something impossible. The scars from that day still existed, of course. There were nights when Megan woke up from nightmares where men in dark sunglasses chased her. There were moments when the sound of a slamming door made her jump. Trauma doesn't just disappear because the story had a happy ending. But Megan had learned to carry those scars not as weaknesses but as reminders of her strength. Every time she felt fear and faced it anyway, she was honoring that 10-year-old girl who had chosen courage when it would have been so much easier to choose safety. That night, lying in her comfortable bed, in the room that was hers, in the house that was her home, Megan thought about the future. She didn't know exactly what she wanted to be when she grew up. Maybe an actress, continuing to explore this passion for drama she had discovered. Maybe a lawyer so she could help other children in difficult situations. Maybe a social worker, working directly with families who needed support. The possibilities were endless, and that was both frightening and exciting. But one thing she knew for sure. Whatever path she chose, she would use the lessons she had learned. That courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. That kindness is a choice we make every day. That family is not just about blood, but about the people who choose to stand by your side. And that even from the most terrible situations, the most unexpected blessings can be born. Megan closed her eyes, a soft smile on her lips, and allowed herself to drift into a peaceful, nightmare-free sleep, lulled by the certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Outside, in the main garden of the mansion, the plane trees swayed gently in the night breeze, their leaves whispering secrets to the moon, and in the guest house Claire was also getting ready for bed, her heart full of gratitude for a second chance she never imagined possible. In the main mansion, Henry and Beatrice lay side by side, talking in whispers about how wonderfully Megan had performed in the play, about how Peter was growing up so fast, about how blessed they were to have this family. And in Peter's room the boy stared at the ceiling, thinking about his best friend, the girl who had saved his life and, in doing so, had saved their entire family in a way none of them could have predicted. He didn't fully understand it yet, he was too young for that, but he felt instinctively that Megan was not just a friend or an adopted sister. She was the person who had taught him the true meaning of courage, kindness, and loyalty. The Chadwick mansion, which had once been on the brink of invasion and destruction, was now at peace, protected not by expensive security systems or armed guards, but by the love of a family that had learned, the hard way, what truly mattered in life. And at the center of it all was Megan Smith, now Megan Smith Chadwick, the girl who had been invisible and who now shone so brightly it was impossible not to see her. The girl who had proven that heroism has no age, social class, or limitations. It only requires a heart willing to do what is right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. 5 years passed like leaves carried by the wind, each one marking a different season in Megan's life. She was now 17, in her final year of secondary school, and the world that had once seemed so vast and impossible now opened before her with possibilities she had barely dared to dream of as a child. It was an October afternoon, one of those London afternoons when spring explodes in vibrant colors and the air has a special scent of hope. Megan was in her room in the guest house, surrounded by A-level revision books, when her mobile phone buzzed. It was Peter, who was now 14 and in year 11. "Need to talk to you," his message read. "It's important. Garden in 10 minutes. Megan frowned. There was an urgency to the message that was unusual. Peter was generally laid back, rarely showing anxiety. She quickly replied with an "okay" and left the house, crossing the small stone path that connected the guest house to the main garden. Peter was already there, sitting on the same stone bench where Megan used to sit years ago, when she was just the invisible daughter of the cleaner. He was different, Megan noticed immediately. He was no longer the chubby 9-year-old boy. He had grown, was now taller than her, his shoulders broadened from competitive swimming. But it was the expression on his face that worried her. He looked tormented. "What happened?" she asked, sitting down next to him. Peter looked at his own hands for a long moment before speaking. "I found something today, rummaging through old things stored in my dad's office, a box of old documents he never threw away. And?" He pulled a yellowed envelope from his pocket. "And I found this. It's a letter, written a long time ago, and it changes everything I thought I knew about that day." Megan felt a chill run down her spine. That day could only mean one thing: the day of the kidnapping, the day that changed everything. She took the envelope with hands that suddenly felt shaky and read the recipient. It was addressed to Henry, but it hadn't been sent by post. It had been hand-delivered, apparently. Inside was a handwritten letter, the script shaky but legible. Megan began to read, and with each line her heart beat faster. Mr. Chadwick, the letter began. I am writing this letter because my conscience gives me no peace. I took part in something terrible, something that could have cost your son his life, and I need you to know the whole truth. My name is Julian Ramos, and I was a security guard at your residence for 3 years. You always treated me well, paid a fair wage, trusted me. And I betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. I was roped in by dangerous men who knew I had gambling debts, that I was desperate. They offered money, a lot of money, for me to help them break into your house. I was weak. I said yes. But I never imagined they would use your son as a hostage. When I found out the full plan, it was too late to back out without putting my own life at risk. So I did the only thing I could. I tried to sabotage the plan from within. That's why I called in sick on the day of the kidnapping. I thought my absence would disrupt their scheme, but they just brought in the replacement, Marcus, who was also involved. What you don't know, what nobody knows, is that I made an anonymous call to the police 3 hours before the planned invasion. I gave them the address of the house where your son was being held. But the police didn't take it seriously. They thought it was a prank call. If they had acted, maybe none of what happened later would have needed to happen. But someone did act. A little girl. Claire's daughter. I saw her that day, hidden at the back of the property, watching everything with those observant eyes that never missed a thing. And somehow that child did what I didn't have the courage to do. She saved your son. She risked her own life, and I, a grown man, a former police officer who should have known what was right, stayed hidden, a coward, waiting for it all to be over. I'm in prison now, serving my sentence, and I deserve every day of it. But before being transferred to the main prison, I needed you to know that that girl, Megan, didn't just save your son. She saved what was left of my soul. Seeing a child so small show so much courage made me realize how lost I had become, how much I had betrayed everything I once believed in. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I hope that you will protect that girl, that you will give her everything she deserves. Because if there is such a thing as angels on earth, Megan is one of them. And I, who helped to almost destroy a family, was a witness to how a pure heart can save everything. Julian. Megan finished reading with tears in her eyes. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely hold the paper. Peter was crying silently beside her. He tried to warn them, Peter said, his voice choked. The man who helped plan it all tried to stop it. And you did what even he couldn't do. Megan didn't know what to feel. For years, she had thought of the security guard Julian as the villain, the traitor who sold out the family that trusted him. And now she discovered the story was more complex, more human. He wasn't innocent, far from it. But he wasn't purely evil either. He was just a weak man who had made terrible choices and then tried, inadequately, to fix them. "Why did your dad never show this to anyone?" Megan asked. Peter wiped his eyes. "I think he wanted to protect you. He didn't want you to feel like your courage was somehow diminished by someone else trying to help first. Or maybe he was so angry at Julian that he didn't even want to acknowledge his attempt. I don't know. But I thought you needed to know." They sat there in silence for a long time, processing the revelation. The garden around them remained beautiful and peaceful, oblivious to the emotional turmoil happening on that stone bench. Finally, Megan spoke. "It doesn't change anything, you know. What happened, happened. Julian made his choices. I made mine. And in the end, we all had to live with the consequences." "But it does change things," Peter insisted. "It changes things because it shows that even in the darkest situations, there are always people trying to do the right thing. Sometimes they fail, like Julian failed. But sometimes they succeed, like you succeeded. And that's beautiful, in a strange way." Megan smiled through her tears. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," he replied, shrugging with a shy smile. It was at that moment that Henry appeared in the garden, walking towards them with hurried steps. His face was pale, and he was holding an envelope in one hand. Megan and Peter exchanged a worried glance. "Dad?" Peter called out. "What's happened?" Henry approached, and to their surprise, his hands were trembling. He looked directly at Megan. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago, but I was always too much of a coward. And now I've received this letter from a solicitor and I can't put it off any longer." Megan felt her stomach churn. "What letter?" Henry sat down on the garden floor on the grass, something completely out of character for the always composed businessman. Megan and Peter got off the bench and sat beside him, forming a small circle. "Do you remember I said I found out about the kidnapping because I accessed the mansion's cameras remotely during my flight?" Henry began. Megan nodded. It was part of the story everyone knew. "But that's not quite how it happened," he continued, his voice heavy with guilt. "I received a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, someone I had left behind when I built my empire and my new life." "Who?" Peter asked, confused. Henry took a deep breath. "My brother, Brian Alistair Chadwick. You don't even know he exists because I cut him out of my life 15 years ago after he got involved with the wrong people, with addictions that destroyed any relationship we had. I paid for treatments, gave him chances, but he always relapsed. Until one day, after he stole money from the company to pay off drug debts, I said enough. I cut all ties. He ceased to exist for me." Megan and Peter were in absolute silence, processing the revelation. Henry had a brother no one knew existed. "But on that day," Henry continued, "Brian called me. He was desperate, crying, saying he'd gotten involved with dangerous people again, that these people knew about me, about my family, about my money, and that they were planning something terrible. He didn't know exactly what, but he'd overheard snippets of conversations, a kidnapping, an invasion. He begged me to believe him, to protect my family." "And did you believe him?" Megan asked. Henry shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "No, I thought it was just another one of his manipulations, another attempt to get money or attention. I hung up on him, and it was only when I saw you on the cameras, Megan, a 10-year-old girl running through the corridors of my house trying to save my son, that I understood Brian was telling the truth. It was too late. I had ignored the warning, and because of that, my son was kidnapped, and you had to risk your life." The guilt in Henry's voice was palpable, as thick as fog. Megan understood then why he had always treated her with such reverence, such gratitude that bordered on devotion. It wasn't just because she had saved Peter. It was because he felt it was his fault that Peter had needed saving in the first place. "And Brian?" Megan asked gently. "Where is he now?" Henry held up the envelope he had brought. "He died 3 days ago. An overdose. This letter is from his solicitor, informing me and saying that Brian left something for me, a final letter. And in it, he says he never forgave me for not believing him that day. He says he spent the last 5 years trying to get clean, trying to redeem himself. But the weight of that rejection was too much. And now he's gone. And I'll never have the chance to say, I'm sorry." Henry broke down then, crying with an intensity Megan had never seen in any adult. It was the cry of a man who had carried a terrible weight alone for years, who had built a wall of success and composure around a guilt that was eating him up inside. Megan didn't think. She just moved closer and hugged Henry, as a daughter would hug a father. Peter did the same on the other side, and the three of them stayed there in the garden, holding each other, crying, releasing years of repressed pain. When they finally calmed down, it was Megan who spoke first. "Uncle Henry, can I say something?" Henry nodded, wiping his face with his hands. "You're not to blame. You made the decision you did based on the history you had with your brother. Anyone in your position would have done the same. And even if you had believed him, we don't know if things would have been different. Maybe the kidnapping still would have happened. Maybe I still would have had to do what I did. The universe has its own plans, and there's no point in imagining other scenarios. But if I had believed him," Henry said, his voice broken, "if I had given him a chance, then you would have made a different choice," Megan interrupted, "but not a better one, just different. And your brother, he made his own choices too. He chose to get involved with dangerous people. He chose to keep using drugs. And yes, he also chose to try and warn you, which shows that deep down there was still goodness in him. But in the end, every person is responsible for their own choices. You didn't kill your brother. The drugs killed him. The addiction killed him. And it's terrible, it's sad, but it's not your fault. Peter held his father's hand. And even if it was, he said, we'd still have to find a way to move forward. Because that's what people do. They carry their pain, their guilt, their regrets, but they keep living. They keep trying to do better. Henry looked at the two of them, these young people who were somehow wiser than him. How did you two get so mature? He asked with a wet laugh between his tears. I think early trauma speeds up the process, Megan said with a half smile. She knew that from experience. That terrible day 5 years ago had made her grow up faster than any child should, but it had also made her who she was, strong, resilient, compassionate. The three of them sat there until the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. They talked about Brian, about the good memories Henry had, of his brother before everything fell apart. They talked about guilt, forgiveness, redemption, and they talked about how families are complicated, full of untold stories, guarded secrets, hidden pains. Eventually, Beatrice appeared in the garden, looking for them for dinner. When she saw the three of them sitting on the grass, their eyes red, but together she understood immediately that something important had happened. She didn't ask. She just sat down with them, completing the circle, offering her silent presence as support. Claire also appeared soon after, coming from the guest house, and upon seeing the whole family gathered like that, she joined them without hesitation. And there in that garden where so many things had happened, where Megan had watched for years before becoming part of the family, where Peter and Megan had sealed their eternal friendship, they sat together as night fell over London. In the following weeks, Henry made some important decisions that would change not only his life, but the legacy he would leave to the world. The memorial for Brian was held on a sunny November morning, in a small chapel at Kensal Green Cemetery. Henry insisted that Megan and Peter be present, not as an obligation, but as witnesses to a moment of reconciliation. There were fewer than 20 people there, some of whom Henry didn't even recognize, probably friends Brian had made in his years of battling addiction. When it was Henry's turn to speak, he walked to the pulpit with slow steps, his trembling hands holding a piece of paper with notes he ultimately didn't consult. He looked at the small group gathered and began to speak from the heart. My brother Brian was 2 years younger than me, he began, his voice firm but filled with emotion. When we were children, he was my best friend. He followed me everywhere, copied everything I did, laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny. He admired me in a way I didn't deserve. And when we grew up, when things started to get difficult for him, I wasn't there. I chose my career, my success, my new family, and I left him behind. I tell myself it was because he chose a path I couldn't follow. But the truth is, I abandoned him when he needed me most, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. Megan saw tears streaming down Henry's face, something still rare to see. Beatrice, sitting in the front row, cried silently, a handkerchief pressed to her lips. But Brian, even at rock bottom, still had goodness inside him, Henry continued. He tried to warn me when he found out dangerous people were planning something against my family. And I didn't believe him. That was my last chance to show that I still cared, and I failed. But Brian gave me a gift without knowing it. Through his attempt to warn me, even though I ignored it, he showed me there was still hope. And that hope manifested through a brave child who saved my son and, in doing so, saved our entire family. Henry looked directly at Megan. My brother passed away believing I never forgave him. But he was wrong. I forgave him a long time ago. I just couldn't forgive myself. And maybe I never will. But what I can do is honor his memory by turning this pain into something useful, something that helps other people who struggle as he struggled. After the service, several people approached Henry, sharing their own stories of battling addiction, thanking him for speaking so openly. One woman in particular, in her 40s, with kind eyes marked by years of suffering, held Henry's hands in hers. Your brother helped me when I had no one, she said. He took me to my first support meeting. He said that if he could try to recover, so could I. He saved my life, Mr. Chadwick, And I want you to know that he wasn't just your addicted brother. He was a complete human being, with kindness, with humor, with love to give. Henry hugged the woman, and Megan saw in that embrace years of guilt beginning to dissolve. It wouldn't disappear completely, but perhaps it could coexist with acceptance and forgiveness. The following week, Henry officially announced the creation of the Brian Alistair Chadwick Foundation, dedicated to the treatment and recovery of people with chemical dependencies. He invested an initial £5 million, with a commitment to continue annual funding. But more important than the money was the personal involvement. Henry began visiting rehabilitation centers, talking to patients, listening to their stories without judgment. Megan accompanied him on one of these visits to a treatment center in South London. She saw Henry talking to young people who were Peter's. Paige heard him speak about Brian with a raw honesty she never expected from him. And she saw these young people respond, opening up, sharing their own struggles, because Henry wasn't there as a distant, wealthy benefactor, but as a brother who understood the pain of loving someone who fights invisible demons. Henry's third decision was perhaps the most intimate. He decided he would no longer keep secrets from the family. On a Saturday afternoon, he gathered Peter, Megan, Beatrice, and Claire in the living room and simply began to talk. He told them about his own difficult childhood in rural Yorkshire, about the alcoholic father who beat him and Brian, about the mother who died young from cancer, leaving 2 boys alone with a violent man. He told them how he ran away to London at 16, how he slept on the streets for months, how he worked odd jobs until he got a scholarship that changed his life. He told them about the times he stole food because he was hungry, about the shame he felt, about how that experience had marked him forever. And he told them how, when he finally achieved success, he wanted to completely erase that past. He changed his Yorkshire accent, made up stories about a comfortable childhood, cut ties with anyone who had known him before, including Brian, who was a constant reminder of where he came from. "I was so afraid people would find out the truth," Henry said, his voice breaking. Afraid they would know that the successful entrepreneur, Henry Alistair Chadwick, was actually just Rick, a street kid who stole bread from the market. So, I built this persona, this mask, and eventually I forgot who I really was underneath it. Beatrice held her husband's hand. "Do you think I didn't know?" she said softly. "Henry, I always knew. From the beginning. I saw the scars on your body that you never explained. I heard you scream in your nightmares. I noticed how you reacted when you saw homeless children. I knew, and I never stopped loving you because of it. If anything, I loved you more for knowing how hard you fought to get where you are." Henry looked at his wife in astonishment, tears now flowing freely. "Why did you never say anything?" "Because I was waiting for you to feel safe enough to tell me. And you finally are." Peter went over and hugged his father. "I think it's amazing, Dad. You came from nothing and built all this. That doesn't make you less. It makes you more." Megan also stood up, went to Henry, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Uncle Henry, I understand more than you know. I also know what it's like to try and hide where you come from. But now I understand that our origins don't define us. It's what we do with the opportunities we're given that matters." Claire, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke. "Mr. Henry, I have always admired you, but now I admire you even more, not for the success or the money, but for the courage to finally be who you really are." That afternoon stretched into the evening, with more conversations, more revelations, more tears and laughter. The Chadwick family was shedding its masks, its secrets, its guarded shames, and in the process becoming stronger, more united, more real. Megan also made her own decisions that would define the path of her adult life. The idea for the blog came unexpectedly in an English class where the teacher asked them to write about a moment that changed their lives. Megan wrote about the day of the kidnapping, about the fear she had felt, about the decision to act despite the terror that paralyzed her. She wrote with a raw honesty that made her teacher cry. "You need to share this," the teacher said, handing back the essay with a top mark. "There are so many children who need to hear that they are not alone in their fears, in their traumas." And so the blog Invisible Courage was born. Megan started by writing about her own experience, but carefully, appropriately for children who might be reading. She didn't go into violent or frightening details. She focused on the feelings, the choices, the lessons learned. The first post was titled, "When Fear Comes to Visit." In it, Megan wrote about how fear wasn't a sign of weakness, but of intelligence. Fear warns us of danger, but courage is what we do in spite of fear. The responses started coming in. At first, there were few shy comments from children and teenagers sharing their own stories. An 11-year-old girl who had witnessed something terrible at school, a 13-year-old boy who lived in fear because of situations at home. Each story was different, but the fear was the same, and Megan replied to every comment personally, offering words of encouragement, sharing resources for help, simply being present. In 3 months, the blog had over 5,000 followers. In 6 months, it was 15,000. Megan started receiving messages from parents thanking her, from teachers using her posts in lessons on emotional intelligence, from child psychologists recommending the blog to their patients. Laura, who now worked on the blog as a volunteer editor, proofreading texts and helping with the technical side, was amazed by the impact. "You're changing lives, Megan," she would say. For real. But it was one particular message that touched Megan most deeply. It came from a 10-year-old girl from an underprivileged part of London who wrote that she was being bullied at school and was so scared she didn't want to leave the house anymore. But after reading Megan's blog, she decided to tell her mother and ask for help, and things started to get better. "If you, at only 10 years old, could do something so brave, then so can I," the girl wrote. "You showed me that even small. People can be strong." Megan cried when she read that. She realized that the terrible experience she had gone through wasn't just about her. It was about creating a path for other children to follow when they needed it. Her trauma had a purpose now. It had meaning. She also started volunteering at a charity that helped vulnerable children. Once a week, she would go to a community in East London and spend the afternoon with children living in difficult circumstances. She didn't go as a teacher or a mentor, but as someone who understood, someone who had come from a similar place and had found a way out. The children adored her. Megan didn't talk down to them, didn't treat them like poor things who needed pity. She treated them as equals, as complete people with dreams and potential. She played football with them on the dirt pitch, helped with homework, listened to their stories, shared her own vulnerabilities. One day, a 9-year-old girl named Julia approached her after the activities. Julia was quiet, always in the corners, her eyes too big for her small face. She tugged on Megan's sleeve and whispered, "Is it true you used to live in a small house?" Megan knelt down to the girl's level. "It's true, my mum and I lived in a very small flat in Peckham. And now you live in a mansion." "Now I live in a guest house that's on the grounds of a mansion." "But you know what's most important, Julia? It's not where you live that defines who you are. It's what you have in here." Megan gently touched the girl's chest over her heart. "And in here," she touched her head, "your kindness and your intelligence. Those are the things no one can take from you." Julia thought for a moment. "Do you think I can be important too, even living here?" Megan held the girl's hands. "Julia, you already are important. You just need to discover how much. And when you do, you'll fly so high that nothing will be able to hold you down." The girl hugged Megan tightly, and in that hug was all the hope of a child who had just understood that her future was not limited by her present. Megan left that day knowing, with absolute certainty, what her calling would be. Child psychology, yes, but more specific than that. Working with traumatized children, helping them process difficult experiences, find strength within themselves, and understand that trauma doesn't have to be destiny. Claire, when Megan shared this decision, hugged her daughter with a pride so intense it was almost palpable. "You're going to be amazing," she said, "because you haven't just studied it, you've lived it, and that makes all the difference." The months flew by in a succession of classes, volunteer work, blog posts, and precious moments with her family. Soon it was December again, and Megan was about to turn 18. With that would come legal adulthood, graduation from secondary school, and the decision of which university to attend. She had been accepted into several prestigious institutions, including University College London for psychology, which was her first choice. The acceptance letter had arrived in October, and Megan treasured it, rereading it whenever she needed a reminder of how far she had come. Preparations for the birthday party began a week before. Beatrice insisted on handling every detail personally, something the old Beatrice, the one who delegated everything to staff, would never have done. But the woman who had almost lost her son and gained a daughter was no longer the same. Megan protested that she didn't need anything elaborate, but Beatrice wouldn't listen. "It's not because you need it," she said, arranging another vase of flowers in the garden. "It's because we want to celebrate you, and I'm going to do it in the way I think you deserve." On the morning of her birthday, Megan woke up to the smell of cake baking. She went down to the guest house kitchen and found Claire preparing breakfast, but there was something special on the table. A small box wrapped in simple paper, but with a neat bow. "Happy birthday, my daughter," Claire said, pulling Megan into a tight hug. 18 years old, I can't believe you're a grown woman." Megan opened the present carefully. Inside was a simple silver necklace with a key-shaped pendant. It was clearly old, the silver slightly tarnished with age. "It was your grandmother's," Claire explained, her eyes shining. "The only thing of value she owned. She gave it to me before she passed, said I should give it to you when you became a woman. She said it was the key to open all the doors you deserved to walk through." Megan held the necklace reverently. She had never known her grandmother, who had passed away shortly before she was born, but she felt, in that piece of old silver, a connection to the strong women who came before her. Women who had fought, who had survived, who had passed that strength down through generations. "I'll wear it always," Megan promised, putting on the necklace, "and I'll remember that I carry her strength with me." The party began at dusk. The garden was transformed. Fairy lights hung from every tree, creating a magical glow. Round tables covered with white cloths were scattered across the lawn. There were flowers everywhere, jasmine, roses, lilies, filling the air with intoxicatingly mixed fragrances. A small dance floor had been set up, and a guitarist played softly in the background. The guests began to arrive. Laura came with her parents, carrying a huge present wrapped in silver paper. Her friends from the drama club came as a group, all excited, already planning photos for social media. Some teachers from school were also invited, including the English teacher, who had encouraged Megan to create the blog. But the biggest surprise came when Megan saw an unfamiliar group entering the garden. There were about 10 people, children and teenagers of various ages, accompanied by a coordinator. Megan recognized some of them from the charity where she volunteered. "They insisted on coming to wish you a happy birthday," explained the coordinator, a friendly, plump woman named Marcia. "They pooled their own money to buy a present. I couldn't say no." Julia, the shy 9-year-old, broke away from the group and ran to Megan, hugging her legs tightly. "Happy birthday, Megan. You're the coolest person in the world." Megan knelt and hugged the girl back, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. "You didn't have to come. It's so far from here." "We wanted to," said an older boy of about 13 named Raphael. "You always show up for us. We wanted to show up for you too." The present they brought was simple but touching. A handmade photo album, each page decorated with drawings and collages. There were photos from all the times Megan had been at the charity, surrounded by smiling children. And on each page, the children had written messages. "You taught me I can be strong," Julia had written in a shaky hand. "You never give up on us," Raphael had written. "When I grow up, I want to be like you," said another message. Megan flipped through the album, tears now streaming freely, each page a testament that her life had purpose, that her pain had not been in vain. Henry, watching the scene from a distance, approached Beatrice and whispered, "It was the best thing we ever did, bringing Megan into our family." Beatrice agreed, wiping her own eyes. She didn't just save Peter that day. She saved all of us. She taught us what really matters. The party continued with music, dancing and delicious food, prepared by Beatrice with help from Claire. There was laughter, lively conversation, moments of pure joy. The children from the charity mingled with Megan's school friends, and to everyone's surprise, they got along wonderfully. Julia spent most of the evening talking to Laura about makeup and hairstyles, while Raphael played video games with Peter in the games room. When it was time to blow out the candles on the cake, Megan was surrounded by everyone she loved. The light of the 18 candles illuminated her face, and she closed her eyes to make a wish. But she realized she had nothing to wish for. Everything she needed, everything she wanted was already there. Her mother on her right, her adoptive parents on her left, Peter in front, filming everything on his phone with a huge smile, loyal friends, children she had helped who were now celebrating her. It was more than enough, it was abundance, so she wished for something else. She wished that all the children going through difficult times would find their own way out, their own Megan to help them. She wished that no one would have to be invisible against their will, and she blew out the candles. Henry called for silence to make a toast, and his speech was so emotional, so genuine that there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. But it was when Peter asked to speak that Megan was truly moved. He stood up, clearly nervous, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. "I'm not good with words like my dad," he began, "but I want to say one thing. Megan, you're not just my adopted sister or my best friend. You're the reason I understand what it means to be brave. Before that day, I thought courage was for superheroes, for special people. But you showed me that courage is a 10-year-old girl deciding to do the right thing even when she's terrified. It's carrying on even when it would be easier to give up. It's kindness when the world has taught you to be tough. You saved my life, but more than that, you taught me how to live. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be half the person you are. Happy birthday, Megan. I love you." Megan couldn't hold it in anymore. She stood up and hugged Peter with all her strength, both of them crying and laughing at the same time, as everyone around them applauded. Later, when the party was over and most of the guests had left, Megan was helping clear away the decorations when Peter approached. He had something in his hand, a small, wrapped gift. "I want to give you this before it's officially tomorrow," he said, holding out the present. Megan opened it carefully. Inside was a silver photo frame with a picture she didn't even know existed. It was from the day of the kidnapping, taken by the police. It showed Megan and Peter sitting side by side in Mrs. Gable's flat, their hands intertwined, their faces dirty and bruised, but their eyes shining with relief and something more. Hope. Beneath the photo, Peter had engraved a phrase, "The beginning of everything." "It's perfect," Megan said, hugging the friend who was more like a brother. "Thank you." When she finally went to sleep that night, she placed the photo frame on her bedside table, where it would be the first thing she saw every morning and the last thing every night, a reminder of where she started, of how far she had come, and that, even from the most terrible situations, the most beautiful stories can be born. Megan dreamed that night. She dreamed she was that 10-year-old girl again, sitting on the back steps, watching a world that wasn't hers. But this time, the girl she was now appeared in the dream and sat down next to the girl she had been. And she said to her, "It's going to be okay. You're going to do things you can't even imagine are possible. You're going to save lives. You're going to find a family. You're going to discover who you really are, and you'll learn that you are always visible, always important, always enough. You were just waiting for the right moment to shine." The younger girl in the dream smiled, and Megan woke up with that smile still on her lips, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing she had the strength to handle anything. After all, she had already faced the impossible once, and if she had to, she would do it again. 5 years later, Megan had graduated with honors in psychology from UCL, specializing in childhood trauma. She had opened her own clinic, a welcoming, colorful space where she saw children from all social classes. For every patient who could pay, she saw 2 for free. It was her way of giving back, of ensuring no child went without help for lack of resources. Peter was at university studying engineering, but spent every weekend at home, where he remained Megan's best friend. Henry had expanded the Brian Alistair Chadwick Foundation, which now had 4 treatment centers in London and plans to open more in other cities. Beatrice, surprisingly, had discovered a passion for social work and coordinated family support programs through the foundation. Claire, now retired from heavy work, but still supervising the mansion's staff in a consultative role, spent most of her time tending to the garden and visiting Megan at her clinic, where she helped with administrative tasks and baked cakes for the children who came for therapy. One Thursday afternoon, Megan was at her clinic when her receptionist informed her there was a new patient scheduled, a 10-year-old girl brought in by her mother who had witnessed something traumatic and was having nightmares. When the girl entered the consulting room, small with big frightened eyes wearing simple but clean clothes, Megan saw herself 8 years ago. The girl sat in the colorful armchair, looking around nervously, clearly expecting Megan to judge her, to think she was weak, to dismiss her as insignificant. Megan sat opposite her, not behind an imposing desk, but on the same level, eye to eye. "Hi," she said gently. "My name is Megan, and I want you to know one thing before we start. You are very brave for being here. I know it's scary to talk about difficult things, but this is a safe space, and you are not alone." The girl looked at her for a long moment, then whispered, "You'll think I'm silly, everyone does." Megan shook her head. "Never. Do you know why? Because I also went through something scary when I was your age, and I know exactly how you're feeling. And I promise you, it's not silly. Your feelings are valid. Your fear is real. And we're going to work together to help you feel strong again. How does that sound?" The girl nodded, and for the first time since she had walked in, a small smile appeared on her face. As the session progressed, Megan looked out of her office window, seeing London stretching out in all directions. That huge city that had once intimidated her now felt like home. She had been on an impossible journey, from an invisible girl to a woman who helped other invisible children find their voice, their strength, their light. And she understood, finally and completely, that that terrible day 8 years ago had not just been a tragedy that ended well. It had been the catalyst for a life of purpose. Every emotional scar she carried was also a source of empathy that connected her to the children who needed her. Every nightmare that still occasionally visited her was also a reminder that she had survived and thrived. At the end of the session, when the girl left the office visibly lighter, her mother squeezed Megan's hands. "Thank you," she said, her eyes shining. "Thank you for seeing my daughter." Megan smiled. "It's what I do. I see the people the world tries to make invisible, and I help them understand they were always visible. They just needed someone to really look." That evening, Megan went home, no longer to the guest house, but to her own flat she had bought with her first salary, a charming loft in Notting Hill. But before going there, she stopped by the Chadwick mansion, as she did every Thursday for family dinner. The scene she found was the same as always: Henry telling stories from work, Beatrice serving the food she had prepared with love, Peter good-naturedly complaining about some boring university professor, Claire laughing at something someone had said. It was ordinary. It was every day. It was perfect. And Megan, sitting at that table, surrounded by these people who were her family not by blood but by choice and love, felt a gratitude so profound it filled every cell of her being. She looked around the table, memorizing the moment, the familiar faces, the shared laughter, the love that was so palpable it seemed to have physical substance. And she thought of the girl she had been, sitting on the back steps, watching a life she believed would never be hers. If she could go back in time and say something to that girl, she would say this: "The courage you will need is already inside you. The love you will find is waiting for you. And the life that seems impossible is closer than you imagine. Just hold on, just take one more step. Just keep being you, because who you are is already enough. It always was, it always will be." Megan smiled to herself, took another piece of Beatrice's carrot cake, and dove back into the family conversation, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be, living exactly the life she was meant to live, being exactly who she was meant to be. And it was more than enough. It was everything.